Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. I hope you enjoy. Great. Becca, how are you? Thanks so much for being on the show.
Good. You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, excited to talk. So guest today is Becca Bailey, currently an engineering manager at Formidable. You also worked at a number of Chicagoland companies in the past. And I think a Dev Bootcamp graduate from back in the day. So another kind of career changer. Anything else I missed? Anything I should have included?
No, that's about it.
Cool. Great. Can you share a little bit about your company and kind of what your team looks like right now?
Yeah, so I work at Formidable, as you said. Formidable is a consulting company, and we work primarily in JavaScript and React, but we also have some full stack engineers and some cloud services and a few other various things that we do. I am working both as a front-end React engineer and also as an engineering manager. So I've managed a lot of different teams over the years, but the one that I am working with right now is a small team. We are working at a large e-commerce company, and we are working on some performance improvements for their product page. So I currently lead a team. I have 3 reports, and 2 of them are on my team at the moment. And we are embedded within a team at our clients, and we are doing a lot of work like going through performance reports and refactoring and making improvements and making plans for the future that allow them to have better code and better performance.
Yeah, that's really cool. I sometimes I think of consulting as like, oh, we need someone to build this project, right? Or like build out this new product for us. But I don't think about it a lot in the terms of like, okay, we have something that works, but we need it to work better, right? Like actually, like it's maybe it's older, or it's slow, and it's just not doing what it needs to anymore. That's cool coming in and like being able to be the optimizers, the hit squad. That's fun.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, yeah, my consulting projects have been a combination of the two. Sometimes it is like build us a new thing, but more often I think Formidable tends to be really specialized in like, how do we make this better? So I really enjoy those projects a lot.
Nice. That's cool. I probably I'd be scared to go back and look at my own code in the past and be like, what would this should be optimized.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your pathway into technology? How you got into tech?
Yeah. So I have a degree in music education, and I graduated during the recession when teaching jobs were really hard to come by. I spent about 5 years bouncing around between different schools and nonprofits, and I worked overseas for a year as a music and drama teacher. I've taught art, I've done a lot of different things, but then it just came to the point where I had like 17 different jobs on my resume, and I couldn't pay off my student loans, and I needed to do something different. So while I was working overseas, actually, I had a blog and I was writing a lot, and I was self-hosting it and doing a lot of technical work on that blog. And then other people started to asking me for my technical support on their blogs, and I kind of became the technical support person. And that led me to want to learn how to do it. So I learned WordPress, I learned JavaScript, CSS, and I just went from there. I came back to the States, went to Dev Bootcamp because I saw that there were a lot of job openings, and there was a really great pipeline of like trying to get new people into the industry, as opposed to a lot of other industries at the time, which were very like, oh, you don't have a master's degree? No, we don't want
Yeah,
you.
sure.
So I was looking around and I was like, well, tech it is. They seem to want me there, as opposed to some of the other experiences I had had. So that was how I got here.
That's really cool. I love that story. And it's like you had an interest and then being able to like develop that. And then I often think of like boot camps as almost like accelerators, right? Like you might have
Mhm.
been able to do it over an extended period of time, but the boot camp kind of helps you do it a little faster, right? And like
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
jump right into a job. Um,
exactly.
That's really cool. For a while I worked at a coding boot camp as like the director of outcomes, helping people get their first job, and it was really interesting. The people that seemed to get jobs the fastest, other than someone who like their uncle or their parent worked in tech already and like kind of got them in the side door, was people who came from education backgrounds or people who had like
Mhm.
music backgrounds. It was really funny. So you have like
Mhm.
both of those, which is funny.
Yeah, interesting.
As far as your first job, so how did that transition into tech? Obviously, you had the blog, the
Mhm.
skills from going to the boot camp. How did you end up in your first tech job?
Yeah, so that's actually a little bit of an interesting story. I actually went into Dev Boot Camp and then came out of it knowing exactly where I wanted to work, and
Interesting.
got pretty lucky in that actually panned out. So before I went to boot camp, I had met some people who worked at Eighth Light, which is another consulting company in Chicago, and they have an apprenticeship program.
Mm,
So their apprenticeship program actually helps career changers and people coming from outside of tech to get that experience and learn and transition into a consulting role at Eighth Light. And having met people, gone to meetups there, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I want that learning experience. I want to be at a place that's really welcoming to people from outside of tech. So I went through boot camp. I applied. It was a really long application process. It
sure.
took probably 2 months to get all the way through it because there were multiple rounds of pairing and coding challenges. And I learned to write an AI algorithm. And like there was just a lot of stuff that I learned in that process in order to get there. And during that time, I was like applying elsewhere
Mhm.
just because, but I was pretty targeted in exactly where I wanted to work. And in that case, it worked out.
That's really cool. Yeah, Eighth Light is probably one of the better examples of like a really strong apprenticeship program in Chicago. And then from I don't know if it's Eight Light specifically, but Anova around the same time, and a handful of other companies kind of spun up these like apprenticeship programs that I think
Mm-hmm.
worked out really well for companies that it's obviously an investment, but they get paid off
Mm-hmm.
really well for them. And a lot of those companies now have like this great pipeline of folks that are kind of career changers because now they have managers that are in those roles, right? Who don't
Mm-hmm.
have maybe like the same stigma or bias towards or against career changers that some other companies
Mm-hmm.
might have, right? So
Yeah,
that's really
yeah.
cool. And how'd you get connected with Formidable, the most recent role?
Yeah, so that's another good question. While I was working at Eighth Light as a consultant there, I just started becoming a little bit curious about like what other consulting companies were doing. How do they manage their client engagements? What else is out there? And I wasn't necessarily thinking in terms of job searching at first. I was more just thinking in terms of like, how do we make where I am better and what are the other alternatives? So that's when I first found Formidable. And at the time, they were very localized in Seattle, but they were focused specifically on JavaScript and React. And that was my area of expertise. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. They're another like small consulting company. They do a lot of JavaScript. They are really active in the open source community. So I basically kind of started taking an interest in them just as like I want to know more. I started doing some LinkedIn stalking, reaching out to people, having chats about what it's like, what the company does. And then fast forward like a year and a half, I started working at a startup, left that startup pretty quickly and needed a new place to work. And then at that point, I just submitted an application to Formidable and they were like, hey, you want to come work here? Because you have consulting experience and we kind of know you. And I needed a job and I needed one fast. And it just happens to work out that way.
That's awesome. I love the idea of like building connections at not for the sake of like I want to go work here in the future, but for the sake of like this is a company that's interesting to me. These people do interesting work. Like let's get to know them a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. And yeah, it might just work out well if you need a job and they have an open role for that skill set, right? And
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
so much more
exactly.
targeted than like I don't know if you if you need something, you need something, right? So sometimes you just apply to everything, right, and figure it out and see what you get. But it feels so much more organic, and I feel like the interviews are more enjoyable when you're like, I'm actually excited about this instead of like I heard about it
Mm,
30 minutes ago from the recruiter, right?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm a little bit of an outlier in that most of my job searching has been fairly targeted and it's
Mm,
worked out so far. But I know that that then limits some opportunities to
sure.
discover what else is out there.
Yeah, I tell people early in their career, like keep a list, just a list of companies you're interested in, right? Of like, oh, I've seen Eighth Light does consulting and they do it in an interesting way. Like put that on the list, right? And then at least, maybe you only find one of those every couple months, but you keep that list. And then when you go to look for your next job, you're like, okay, well, I got 12 companies maybe that I'm interested in,
Hmm.
right? I might as well see what's going on at those companies. And if they have open roles, at least that's a start
Hmm.
from like oh no, I got to start from scratch and just start
Yeah. And
applying.
then there are like 500 job postings on LinkedIn, and I have to figure out which ones are
Yeah.
are things that are interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah, dodge the recruiting companies that have 100 roles post. Yeah, lots of
Hmm.
fun. So as a manager and like a hands-on engineer, what part of the interview process are you typically handling? Is it kind of both sides, kind of any section that you need to, or what is your role in the interview process right now?
Yeah, I am an interviewer. The way that Formidable does it is we actually just have a rotation where
Nice.
we just go through the whole list of people, and when your name comes up, you are called upon to do an interview. And different people do different parts of the interviews. I've done the team skills interview, which is just our like cultural, are you a good cultural addition to our teams? The technical interview for front end engineers, and then we have like a live coding interview for front end engineers too. And I've done all three of those.
Nice. What are you typically? I guess it's probably different depending on what your role is. But what are you typically evaluating for when you're doing those interviews?
Yeah, well, it depends on the interview, but I can tell you that for the team skills interview, we're really looking for communication skills, which I know everyone is, but some specific things that we're looking for are you able to have hard or uncomfortable conversations? Do you have
Mm,
examples of when a client or your company came to you and said, we want to build this feature and to build it fast? And you have to push back or say, actually, we need to reevaluate this scope, or our engineers are burning out and we can't do it. Let's come back to the table and figure out how to make this better. So we're looking for the ability to have those kinds of conversations. We're looking for someone who is not set in one particular mindset. We ask a lot of questions around like, have you have you changed your mind, and
mm,
what sort and like when did that how did that happen? We also ask things like, tell us about your successes, tell us if when you made a mistake and how you fixed it. So we have a lot of different questions that we ask as a part of that interview, but like I said, the ones I pay attention to the most are you able to have hard conversations? Are you able to admit when you need to when you need to change your mind or when you've made a mistake? Because that really shows a lot about your 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 ability to work on a team. And
mm.
um it is interesting the different range of responses that we get, because I know that those questions do make some people uncomfortable, which is why I've definitely interviewed a few people that kind of dodge them and say, oh, well,
Mm.
I've never made a mistake, but if I did, I would do X, Y, and Z. Um,
Yeah, I do.
and
Go ahead.
yes, go ahead. Sorry.
I do some interview coaching and I ask similar questions about like, tell me a time you've had a disagreement or something with a coworker. And it is kind of funny when someone goes, it's never happened to me. And I go, never? You never had a
Never.
disagreement?
You've been in the industry for 5 years. You've never had a disagreement. I'm
Yeah.
having a hard time believing that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
It's always fun. So as engineers at Formidable, are you interacting with clients directly? So you have to have kind of that skill set as well?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we're all working, like right now, my whole team is just embedded in our client team. So we're all just working alongside other engineers and managers and stakeholders all the time.
Nice.
And sometimes that changes. Occasionally we'll have more of an independent, like we're just working on this on our own, and like maybe only the team lead will have more back and forth around scope or requirements.
Yeah.
But the most common case is us working with the client every day.
Yeah. Are there other things you're evaluating for or looking for in the more technical pieces? Or is it, I mean, communication obviously huge and matters on the technical side and kind of more general, but there are other things you're looking for?
Yeah, so we typically look at, I can tell you about the front end skill set, which is we look for some JavaScript basic knowledge. We often ask questions just around JavaScript and how, and like various syntax. We do expect some amount of React proficiency, at least for front end roles. That might be changing eventually. We're considering broadening that a little bit, but we look for some front end proficiency that is both like, can you talk about how it works? Can you talk about how React rendering works, or how, or like how you would add accessible things, or like, yeah, sorry, I hope you're editing. But can you talk about React, and also can you do a pretty simple coding challenge and talk us through your thought process as you're doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And you mentioned kind of the different kind of seats that you've held as the interviewer. Can you just walk me through the process? So it sounds like there's a kind of a phone screen or some type of resume at the beginning, and then it moves into a tech. You know better than I. Could you walk us through that?
Yeah, so we have a phone screen in the beginning, like you said, typically that's handled by our recruiter. And then from there, it gets passed on, and we do a, I believe the live coding interview is first.
Mm-hmm.
So we have like a 30-minute live coding exercise where we'll just do some pairing on a React problem. From there, we move on to the final interview stage, which is both the team skills interview and the technical deep dive interview.
Great. So shifting the conversation a little bit, when you've been an interviewee in the past, how do you feel that you've done in interviews? You feel like you nailed all of them, or you hate them, somewhere in between?
Oh man, I it depends. So when I was interviewing at for individual contributor like roles, I was generally doing okay because I have the communication skills. I am generally okay at like live coding type things. Algorithms are fine. The area that I've always struggled, which I'll get into a little bit more later, is like the design questions, the system design, the big picture. How do you build this thing?
Yeah.
And I think that's partially because as a front end engineer or as a consultant, I'm often looking at like a little tiny part of the picture and thinking about that bigger picture and having it be really open-ended and not specific constraints, which is just something that I've never experienced, not having like really serious constraints on how many people or how big this system can be. That's really hard for me. And I think that's the area that I've struggled the most.
Yeah.
I will also go out on a limb and say that I've had a little bit of recent experience interviewing for like management roles. And I find that there are a lot of qualifications for managers. I think companies really prefer to promote from within. And then when you're interviewing for that role, they really want you to have very specific experience that is catered specifically to their kind of product, their kind of process, their team structure, their team size. So it's just hard. It's hard to make my specific experience general enough to fit in a different context and make it seem like my skills can apply elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I was probably the later half of my recruiting career. I was mostly working with engineering leaders, like manager or at least lead through manager, VP, CTO level roles. It was always really interesting to see like it's not a one size fits all thing, right? It almost as much as how like a Java engineer isn't necessarily going to be a good fit for a JavaScript role, right? Like
Hmm.
it's almost that different, right? Of like just because
Yeah.
you have that title, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sit in. I think most people could probably make it work in that role, right? But what are they actually looking
Hmm.
for in that role,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, getting the experience to do that. If you don't have it, you don't have it, right? It's kind
Hmm.
of tough. It was
Yeah.
constantly kind of a struggle was saying, okay, what do you want? But what do you actually need this person to do, right? Do you need someone to manage people? Or do
Hmm.
you need someone who actually knows how logistics works? Like, can you teach them
Yes.
that if they know how to manage people? So it's I think almost more difficult finding the right place as a manager because
Hmm.
you have all the questions of like, okay, is this a hands-on position or hands-off position or some combination? So you might still get technicals, which is its own whole thing, but then also you got
Hmm.
all these other kind of side things. So I
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I don't envy you. It doesn't it doesn't sound super fun, but I guess when it
Yeah.
works out, when you find the right fit, it's probably really exciting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It when it does, it's probably good to find that good fit on both sides.
Yeah.
It's just a little challenging as an interviewer to figure out, okay, what are the things that I can control? What are the areas where I
Mm.
can grow? How do I tell this story better? And then what are the things that I can't control? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that if I haven't done this in the past, I can't control that. And
Yeah.
maybe that's just not a great fit for me in that case.
Do you have any type of system you use? Like, let's say you're in a technical interview in the past, where someone says, "Great, here's this question," right? And you go,
Mhm.
"Okay, I don't. There's not an immediate solution. It's not like, oh, I've seen this before. It's this, but it's easy, right?"
Mhm.
And you have to like figure out, okay, what do I do from here? Like, how do I break this question down? Do you have any system you
Mhm.
use?
I wouldn't say I have a system, but I tend to ask follow-up questions when
Mm,
I can, because in a real world scenario, when someone gives you like says, "Hey, I want you to build this e-commerce app for me." My follow-up question, I've got a ton of follow-up questions around, well, how many users are you trying
mm,
to reach out to? What sort of products are you selling? What is the team size? How many people can we use to build this thing? Do we have different specialties? So I try as much as I can to get that clarity and to get that specificity,
mm.
because otherwise, like in a vacuum, if I can do anything, sure, I'm going to hire 1,000 engineers at Google and they're going to build it in 3 days and it's going to have a bunch of microservices and like, yeah. But without parameters, it's hard for me to understand how to answer that question.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it almost works against you if you do have like, oh, great, I know how I would do this, right? And you don't ask those questions, then you're halfway through and they go, oh, I didn't tell you our budget's, 100 grand. So you okay, only hire two junior, 1.5 junior engineers or whatever it might be
Yes.
now, right?
Yep,
So it
exactly.
like that could be tough. That's interesting.
Hmm.
Do you have any advice or tips for folks who are preparing for technical interviews?
Um, yeah, I mean, I would say study up on basic algorithms, all of that basic stuff, study up on like how do I parse a string? How do
Mm,
I go through an array? Like all I really I'm on the fence about that sort of stuff as an interviewer, but it's just what you need to do sometimes. And also, don't be afraid to ask those sorts of questions, to ask
mm,
for clarity, to ask, can I Google this? Because at least as when I'm in the interviewer seat, when I'm interviewing another person, I want to see how would you do this in the real world? And in the real world, I don't care if you have to Google it or look up documentation, or if you aren't sure and you have to ask, how do I do this thing? That's just how your real life career works.
yeah.
So I guess just think of it as close to a real life scenario as you can.
Yeah, I found that mentally trying to think of it as like I'm pairing with this person rather than like this person's interviewing me helps.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on how willing the interviewer is to like engage with you. Sometimes they're like, all I'm gonna answer is yes or no, like something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the more conversational you can make it, like I feel like it's so most interviewers I think enjoy that, right? Like, oh, we're actually like there's communication. It's not you silently coding for 20, 30 minutes and me just sitting here judging you, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that helps, even if it's just a mental shift to try to make.
Yeah.
Um, do you have different advice, or maybe additional advice for early career folks? Maybe this is they're coming right out of a career change, or maybe this is their second job that they're looking for.
Yeah. Trying to think about that for a sec.
Yeah.
I think what I would tell them is don't be afraid to say when you don't know something,
Mm,
because when you are early career, that's expected. And sometimes when I'm doing a technical interview and I ask a question, it's actually really helpful to know if that person knows it or not, as opposed
mm,
to them like making up something and kind of going on a tangent. Because most of the time, I'm using that question not just to decide yes or no, but to evaluate their level. Like,
mm,
if I do hire them, do I hire them at a level 2 or a level 3? And I think that kind of feels scary as an early career person to not know the answer, but it's actually really helpful when I know what you know and what you don't know, because that would
mm.
help me to place you in the right role.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great piece of advice, especially early career. Like I probably the first 5, 10 interviews I went on, I thought of this as like it's all a learning experience. Right. If I get an offer from this is great. But if
Mm-hmm.
someone asks me like, do you know what SQL injection is? No, can you explain that to me? Right. And like if everything else went terribly in that interview and I didn't move forward, at least I learned like someone took whatever it is, a couple minutes to explain that to me. Great. Now next time someone asks, hopefully I know. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, writing those things down too, and like I like it's so easy to like brush off of, or try to brush off about it and be like, I don't want to think about that anymore. But like trying to actually think of them as learning experiences rather than like a binary yes or no, like I'm gonna get this job or I don't, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I've worked with a lot of interviewers that are very happy to go through that with you and say, "Oh, you don't know what an XOR operator is. Let me map that out and show you how that works." And then, yeah, like you said, I've learned something and we've gotten to have a dialogue, which can be
Yeah.
really valuable.
Can you, before we take a break here and then move into the technical portion, do you have any interviewing horror stories you're willing to share? People can go, okay, well, if Becca went through this and now she's a great engineering manager and software developer, like I can I can get through it too.
I don't know about horror stories, but I can tell you, like, when I interviewed to work at Eighth Light, I was very, very nervous. I really, really wanted to work there. And I probably pushed myself a little too hard to learn too many things. Like, for example, when I did my first like on-site pairing exercise, the interviewer was using Vim. And so then I didn't know how to use Vim. So I went home and spent like the next 3 days teaching myself how to use Vim, so that the next time I had to do a pairing exercise in Vim, which was like apparently I don't know. At the time, that was a normal thing. I don't know if it is anymore or if that was just an Eighth Light thing. I don't know. But I really was like, okay, well, I guess real software engineers use Vim. So now I'm going to do it too.
Wow.
Um, Same thing with like my coding challenge. We had to write a tic-tac-toe game, and there was like this bonus part of it that not all interviewees did, but where you could learn to write a mini-max algorithm in order to actually write an AI player for your tic-tac-toe game. And I, as a brand new engineer, was like losing sleep at night trying to learn how to write a mini-max algorithm. I called my brother in tears. He was a computer science major and knows this kind of stuff. And I just called him like, I'm trying to be a software engineer and I can't even write a mini max algorithm. What's wrong with me? And I just had this like insane expectation for myself. And now looking back, I'm like, I would never expect a junior engineer to know all of that. but I, but yeah, it was that anxiety and that like I have to know everything really got to me.
Yeah, that's so hard, right? And it's also so hard to know what's important early on and what's not, right? Like, did you need to know that algorithm at that point? Probably not, right? Like,
Yeah.
would it ever come up? Maybe, right? But it's so hard early on. Like, someone was telling me yesterday, like, an interviewer asked me about mobile first, and I realized I didn't know anything about mobile first design. So I spent the last week learning mobile first design, and I was like, okay, like that is a thing. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do, but there's probably other things you could do, right? Like, I don't know if mobile first is going to come up in another interview, right? Like, probably other things to focus on, but it's so hard to know, right? Like, you just don't know if, okay, is every single company going to ask me this or not, right? And that context is really tough.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll move into the technical. Thank you for watching the first half of the Professional Technical Interviewee. The technical interview will be released 1 week from this episode, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.